the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Buttigieg, announced he would also be joining us. So we will have, right now, we'll have the Secretary and the Administrator and other elected officials from the federal, Senator Kelly and Representative Stanton are scheduled to be there. Would invite all of you to come out right there at Metro Center, where we are constructing our first elevated station, and event starts at 10, program starting at 10:30. So we're excited about that. Also, we are the progress in transit for fiscal year 21 is now available, has been distributed to all of you via email. It talks about the construction and delivery of our new MCI coaches, which you saw a picture in the Fountain Hills one. The new Share the Ride ad, and other things that are that have happened in the last fiscal year. And you can visit valleymatra.org/progress-transit to also see a copy of the progress in fiscal year 21. I would like to announce that we have our periodic networking forum where we bring in our diversity, equity, and inclusion forum. That's a DBE networking forum, which will be Wednesday, December 15th at Gateway Community College. Gary Flanoy, our DBE coordinator, and Henry Ikorukwa are leading our efforts. We found that in the past, these are great ways for our DBE community to learn and meet our prime contractors and identify not only opportunities, but how they can take advantage of those. So I just wanted to have you have that on your calendar so you can be aware that's going on. We are in the holiday season, and each year we design, our staff comes up with some pretty good ideas to design some special holiday wraps to join in the festivities of the season. This is the wrap that we have decided this year, agreed to on both. This is the bus wrap. We also have a light rail wrap on the next slide. I think you can see the light rail. These will be coming up soon, and you'll see them around the valley on both buses and on light rail. And once again, this design was created internally by our internal graphics department. We have a lot of talented people there, and this is always a fun thing. Get a lot of comments from people who see these holiday wraps and get in the spirit for the season. The last thing is to go over the calendar, upcoming calendar. December Management Committee and board meetings are canceled. The next time we will meet with you is on January 20th. We'll have the TMC RMC meetings and AFS meetings, as you can see there, on the 5th and the 6th. And Mr. Chair, that is my report.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions or comments for Scott?
I do. I don't know if you saw it in my chat.
I just saw Councilwoman Besser. Go ahead.
Regarding South Central Light Rail, I sit as the chair of Economic Development, Downtown, and Equity and Inclusion. I've gotten several complaints regarding Kiewit and some of the services that are happening within the downtown area. And so what I would like is documentation of all the back and forth regarding some of the issues that those business owners are facing and what were the solutions.
Councilmember, we're more than happy to meet with you and your staff outside this meeting and go over that. That's an ongoing issue. Obviously, when you build such a massive project in a tight area, there are always disruptions and conflicts, and I have a lot of confidence in our staff. We'll be more than happy to sit down with you and go through a detail of the issues that we deal with on an ongoing basis, and to talk about how we are working to make this process as painless as possible. There's no way to avoid that pain, but we want to minimize that and make sure that it's fairly distributed as best we can. And we're more than happy to meet with you and go over that in detail. I'll have our staff work with your staff to set something up.
What I would like is, since it's been a public, it's in part of the report, and it's part of the public piece, I would also like to know it be provided to the whole board, because I believe that it's being brought up in the public, and so publicly we can you can provide me information But I think also there's others that are going to face this in the future when there's expansion. So I'm gladly to meet with you, but I also would like it provided. Normally in our council meetings, when there's public comments like this, information then is provided to the whole board, and what the solution is, or what the issue was and what the solution was. And so I think it's best both ways.
And Councilmember Wilt, we can share that. We would like to get with you because we literally have daily and multiple times a day interaction with stakeholders and with Kiewit and with our team. So I'd need to get a little bit more specific detail as to what exactly you'd want divulged. And also, there is a public forum where these are discussed. We have a construction activity board that meets monthly. That is a public meeting where these specific issues are discussed and are brought specifically with the contractor and with members of that construction board. And that board actually rates and the contractor and discusses in detail items that you're talking about in a public forum at least once a month. But we'll get with your staff to find out exactly how much detail and what you would like done, because like I said, there are literally daily interactions between stakeholders and the contractor.
Okay.
And our
I think,
staff.
Marcus Coleman has provided that information. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other further questions, comments? All right, we'll move on to the next item, our consent agenda. Or, sorry, I skipped you, Mr. Stiff. So, number 3, Audit and Finance Subcommittee update. Councilmember Stiff will provide this update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be very brief. We will be meeting in December, so we just came off that slide from Mr. Smith. But at our meeting in November, we discussed the creation of the internal policy to address the monitoring of contracts at risk of exceeding their authority prematurely. That was based on the last board meeting. A lot of emphasis, and the emphasis is really on those contracts that are at risk of exceeding their authority. We spent a lot of time on it. The detailed minutes were included in the packet. AFS is we're supposed to see the draft at our December meeting, and then the full board is supposed to see that in January. That's the track of that policy discussion. The second item we talked about was an update from ADOT on their revenue forecast, which we will use for the inclusion in the Transit Lifecycle Program and the creation of the FY23 budget. We had not yet received the quote-unquote official version from ADOT as of yet, but right now revenues are continuing to project in the upward fashion. Next, we had a presentation from internal audit on the van pool program audit that was conducted by the City of Phoenix. A few recommendations came out of there that Valley Metro staff is working on, and the Audit and Finance Subcommittee accepted that without question. And finally, we had our first review of the FY22 first quarter budget variance report. Had a few questions on that. One of the things that is included in that as a result of our discussions over the past 18 months or so are some footnotes that we continue to refine every quarter. I think we are as close to bullseye as we have been, and I'd like to thank Tyler and the budget staff for that. But we have been monitoring it. We're on track right now. We don't see any financial anomalies occurring. And subject to questions, that ends my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Stipp. Any questions or comments for the audit and finance piece? Hearing none. Thank you, Councilmember. Next item is a consent agenda. It's presented for action. I ask any of the board members have any questions or items that need to be pulled out for a separate discussion. We have our minutes and then IT hardware replacement on the consent agenda. So if no questions or comments, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minute, all the consent agenda items as posted.
Second.
Second, Councilwoman Pastor, second. Ask Pat to do a quick roll call.
Vice Mayor Malone. Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Mayor Kevin Hartke.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorsey.
yes,
Mayor Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
aye,
Councilmember Stipp.
Aye.
Councilmember Heredia.
Yes.
Councilmember Pastor.
Yes.
Councilmember Brown.
I vote yes.
Mayor Ortega.
Yes.
Councilmember Winters. Councilmember Gomez. Mayor Pereira
Yes.
and Mayor LaVault.
Yes.
Okay, if I called your name and I didn't hear you, if you can just put in the chat your vote and then I'll record it on my sheet. Chair, the votes are to approve the consent agenda.
Perfect. Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. Next item, item number 5, the insurance coverage renewal, commercial property and liability, and workers' comp and employers' liability. I'll pass it over to Scott Smith to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will pass it over to Mike Manow, who will present the insurance item. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. This is that time of the year where Valley Metro, just like the cities and the municipalities, go through the annual insurance renewal program. Before you is the best available program and costs that are available to properly and accurately insure Valley Metro's assets and to protect against losses going into this next year. Happy to answer any questions. We had a handful of very good meetings with the risk professionals from the different cities and also follow-on meetings with city staff to make sure that we work very closely with our broker to weigh all available options with respect to coverage amounts and deductibles, and what's presented before you today for approval really is what's the best available in the market. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Manow. Any questions or comments for Mr. Manow?
Mr. Chair, it's Lauren from Glendale. I do have a question.
Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Mr. Manow, what do we know the number of what was the payout for the previous contract that was covered by the insurance? Do we have a dollar amount for that?
Councilwoman Tomachoff, Mr. Chair, are you referring to to last year's approved budget for insurance renewal for the insurance
Well, I'm
renewal
just
program?
wondering. No, not what the premium was. I'm wondering how much did the insurance policy pay out for claims?
Oh, I think it might be. Thank you for the question. Probably the best way to answer that is to focus on the particular line of coverage that is by far causing the most considerable expense this year, and that's the inland marine insurance coverage. That deals with that. It's called the inland marine. That deals with coverage for Valley Metro's light rail vehicle fleet and soon to be streetcar fleet. That is by and large causing the most considerable increase this year. With respect to payouts, over the last year, Valley Metro has experienced a derailment that was in March of this year, where one vehicle was not able to be repaired, and so therefore was fully replaced. Travelers, the insurance carrier at the time, paid $3 million for the replacement of that vehicle. We also had another significant incident that caused about $1.5 million in damages as well, and Travelers also covered the repair cost associated with that LRV.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question. Does this policy include a not to exceed amount? Is there a cap on benefits?
Yes, yes, Councilwoman, with respect to the inland marine, there is a total cap of 100 million. And again, that is the largest driver this year of insurance increases.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, we request a motion and a second to authorize the CEO to purchase renewal coverage for Valley Metro's insurance needs as follows. Commercial property and liability insurance coverage, including workers' compensation and employers' liability from December 1st, 2021 to November 30th, 2022 for an amount not to exceed $5,671,877. RPTA's obligation is just over 407,000. VMR's obligation is over 5.2 million. Request a motion and a second.
So moved. Lauren.
Second by Bill Stipp.
And second from Council Member Stipp, I think. Right. Perfect. I'll ask Pat to take a roll call vote.
Okay. Vice Mayor Malone,
Yes, aye.
Councilmember Goodman,
Aye.
Mayor Hartke,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorsey, Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilmember Tomachoff,
Aye.
Councilmember Stipp,
Aye.
I'm going to say he's a yes since he seconded the motion. Councilmember Heredia,
Aye.
Councilmember Pastor,
Aye.
Councilmember Brown,
My vote is yes.
Mayor Ortega,
Yes.
Councilmember Winters,
Yes.
Councilmember Gomez, Mayor Pereira,
Yes.
and Mayor LaVault.
Yes.
Chair, the item passes.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. Next item number 6, Chief Executive Officer Recruitment Job Description Approval. We have sent over the job description, and first I just want to thank the members of the Ad Hoc Recruitment Committee for their time reviewing. We took some time earlier this month to review the job description, answer some details and comments that members had on it, and were presented for approval for today. The revised job description, which contains information around the updated budget information and distributed via email, was sent over to y'all, and it's also posted on the Valley Metro website. We have here Jan Plank, who's been assisting us from she is the Human Resources Director for Maricopa County, and also we have Greg Moser from Krauthammer and Associates, our consultant that is leading the charge on this recruitment, are here today and available for any questions from anyone, any board members here. So any questions or comments from the board?
I do.
Is that
The new
Councilwoman
member.
Passar?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Councilwoman Passar?
I just want to thank everybody who really reiterate what the chair said, all the good work that went into really creating the job descriptions and really looking at some of the changes that we had discussed and that were incorporated. So just want to thank everybody and the team, the county, and Greg Mosier, I think it is, for listening to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So from here, if there's no other questions or comments, I request a motion and a second to approve the CO job description as presented.
Mr. Chair, this bill, I'll make that motion. We approve the CEO job description.
Thank you, Councilmember Stipp. Second?
Second,
Uh,
Lauren.
Councilwoman Tomachev. All right, I'll ask Pat to take a quick roll call vote.
Vice Mayor Malone,
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman,
Aye.
Mayor Hartke,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorsey, Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilmember Tomachev,
Aye.
Councilmember Stipp,
Aye.
Councilmember Heredia,
Aye.
Councilmember Pastor,
Aye.
Councilmember Brown,
Aye.
Mayor Ortega,
Yes.
Councilmember Winters,
Yes.
Councilmember Gomez, Mayor Pereira,
Yes.
and Mayor Michael LaVault.
Yes.
Chair, the vote is unanimous.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate
Still
it.
working on my lingo on that, sorry.
No worries. You're good. Item number 7, we have the fiscal year 2020 transit performance report, and I'll call out Mr. Smith to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Marty Zink from our planning department, who will give you an update. Where's Marty? Oh, there he is down there. Okay. Who'll give you an update on the transit performance report. Marty?
Thank you, Scott. Chair Heredia and members of the boards, I am here to present this year's transit performance report. This is from July of 2019 through June of 2020. So that's the data that you'll be seeing. The data from July of 2020 through June of 2021 will be presented to this body next spring. Before I get started, I just want to give a huge shout out to all of your staffs who helped us in compiling this report. As you'll see as we go through this presentation, it is a more detailed summary than we've done in past years, namely to account for the impacts of COVID-19. So next slide, please. Just as usual, some system highlights of what happened from that time period of July 2019 through June in 2020. We saw a little over an 18% decrease in total boardings year on year from fiscal year 19, namely due to COVID. And we'll be getting into more detail in latter slides on what some of the breakdowns are on this. Similar to past years, we see about 3/4 of all system boardings on the bus. In terms of the mode that carries the most passengers per mile, that did continue to be our rail system with just under 4 boardings per mile. Our ADA paratransit maintained above a 90% on-time performance, and our Vanpool average fare rose slightly year on year to about $3.84. Looking at all modes, so every rider that enters the Valley Metro system on our ridership, there was a slight decline from fiscal years 18 to fiscal year 19. And prior to COVID hitting, we were on a very similar trajectory. So a slight decline, not much. However, when the pandemic hit in those last 4 months of this fiscal year, that's when we did see a larger decline. In terms of our operating cost per vehicle mile, it did go up, but by only about 50 cents. Looking at, again, all modes, and this type of a slide will become familiar throughout the presentation. Whenever there's that COVID type molecule on top, that's when it's a COVID specific stat. So this is not comparing year on year, but comparing what we're calling the pre-COVID period which is July of 2019 to February 2020, and comparing that to really when COVID hit the Valley, starting in March of 2020 through the end of the fiscal year in June. The takeaway from this in terms of our ridership as it related to COVID-19, we saw decreases. We saw over a 50% decrease when it came to weekday ridership. However, our weekend service actually retained quite a bit of ridership. The big takeaway from this is that although we did see decreases, we continue to provide service throughout the system. And because of that, we were able to serve our essential riders and keep people going to jobs and keeping the Valley running. In terms of how the agency responded to COVID-19, we started right away in March 2020 when the threat became clear by introducing rear door boarding on buses and enhanced cleaning and fogging of all fleet, as well as, of course, bringing this message out through our marketing to everyone and in every method that we had available. In April 2020, in reaction to just the stark decrease in ridership that we were starting to see, we reduced service to fit demand and will also maintaining safety protocols and of course to be fiscally responsible. So our express and rapid service decreased, as well as a slight decrease in rail. Our circulators, depending on who ran the circulators, there were different levels of decreases. And then in terms of the limited service sections of local routes, oftentimes those were cut if the demand did not justify keeping them. And then finally, at the end of this fiscal year, the last thing the agency did is went out to the riders with a survey on COVID protocols. So looking year on year in terms of our bus system specifically, we do see that drop from fiscal year 19 to 20. However, if COVID would not have been here, the ridership would have been very, very similar to fiscal 19. In terms of the weekday averages, this is kind of what I was referencing back during that COVID slide with all of the modes put together. On our bus system, we see this acutely as well. There's about a 20% drop year on year. The vast majority of this is due to the pandemic. And again, the weekdays is where we saw that largest drop. We continued to serve our essential workforce, but we did see choice riders drop out. Interestingly, our Saturday boardings were quite a bit of a different story. New service and extended service had been added in fiscal year 19, so we saw a large jump in boardings on Saturdays on our bus network. In fiscal year 20, before COVID hit, we had continued to see an increase, and it was only with the pandemic that year on year it did go slightly down. And then in terms of our Sunday service, we did see a decrease, but not as steep as the weekdays. We continue to provide high levels of service on our local bus routes to ensure that essential workers could access their jobs and that people with appointments could make sure to get to what they needed to get to. Looking at COVID by mode of bus. So again, this is comparing that pre-COVID period within fiscal year 20 to the months of service that were impacted by the pandemic. Our local bus saw the least decline of all the different bus modes, under 50%. That makes sense due to just the nature of trips that are taken on our local network. Our circulator service did see higher levels of decline, and service was decreased to match that. Our express rapid service saw the greatest levels of decline of our bus modes, and again, the service levels were decreased to match that new demand. And our rural route saw about a 50% decline, but service was maintained to ensure that we could have safe provision of travel for all of those who need that service. Moving on to the rail system, similar to bus, we do see a drop from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20. But again, if COVID were not to be there, it would be a very, very slight drop, if any, as we were tracking the numbers. When we look at what happened to our rail system during COVID, it essentially mirrors what happened with the bus network. We see the largest decline in ridership on weekdays, but we do see that retention in ridership on Saturdays and Sundays. And interestingly, if you look at the average number of riders between weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, it's quite similar in the COVID period, meaning that that core base of essential workers are still receiving the service that they need. Looking at our paratransit system, as was referenced in the initial part of this presentation, our ADA on-time performance is above 90%, and our operating cost per boarding did go up, but it's less of an increase than we saw in the year prior. When we look at paratransit as it was affected by COVID-19, We see a decline similar to our bus and rail networks of around 50%. And the takeaway here is that a lot of our ADA customers did not feel comfortable traveling, and a lot of non-essential medical appointments and different services were cut back during the pandemic, but we were still there. And for those who needed this service and elected to use it, the paratransit service was available, and there was still a significant number of users who relied on that system during the pandemic. And finally, just two last slides comparing us to some of our peer agencies. It is important to note before I get into this slide that due to the nature of reporting and data collection during the pandemic, we do not yet have a full view of all of our peers. And so for these two slides, we were only able to collect data from those who were willing to share it with us. In terms of our ridership comparison year on year, Valley Metro with the bus network saw a little under a 19% decline. That is slightly larger than some of our peer regions, as you can see with Portland and Houston. However, with San Diego MTS, we're basically on par. And with our rail network, we saw that slightly smaller decline year on year. And as that compares to our peers, it's essentially the same. And then finally, the last piece to look into is the fare box recovery. And again, this is just due to the specific peers that were willing to share information with us. On our bus network, we saw a little under a 30% decline in fare box. Mind you, once that the COVID protocols hit in March of 2020, we instituted rear door boarding on our buses as we installed the different operator safety mechanisms before opening front door boarding back up. In these two peer agencies, they already had safety mechanisms in place, so they did not have to go to that same operation style. And when it comes to our rail network, the two systems you see here have a very similar proof of payment system. And as you can see, our fare box recovery decline was quite steady as it relates to our peers. And with that, that wraps up my presentation, and I am happy to take any questions from the board.
Thank you. Any board members have any questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Bill. I've got a quick question.
Go ahead.
Not necessarily on the history, but I think since the issue was raised here, what I think, and I'm not sure if this is now or future, to be honest with you, but what are we doing to market the return of the bus service? And I'd like to see some report on that in the future, not necessarily now, but one of the big declines that we just saw in this presentation was an almost 80% decline in express bus service riders. But if you have been on I-10, particularly coming from the west, we have a significant traffic issue going eastbound. And I'd like to see some targeted marketing to bring those folks back to the express bus service, especially now that we've got the new big buses going. So I'd like to know what the future plan is for that. Not today necessarily, but at a future agenda, or at least a staff report on the side. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other questions, comments? All right, hearing none, this item was presented for information. If you have further questions or comments, I'm sure you can ask Valley Metro staff for that information. And what Councilmember Stipp brought up is a good question on kind of what are we doing to bring back riders back to our system across the board, specifically on some of these areas that we've lost quite a bit of riders. So next item, item number 8, the history of regional transportation plan, Prop 400 transit life cycle program. So I'll pass it over to Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on your last comment, we'll get staff and prepare a report on the marketing efforts and the efforts related to the express bus as Councilmember Stipp has requested. It's been brought up, as far as item 8, it's been brought up on several different occasions, questions about, Mr. Crowley, of course, brings it up, the history, you might want to say, of services and how it relates to those services that were initially presented, or some people might say promised in the Prop 400 in 2004, and how that has progressed over the last almost 17 years now, as to what we have been able to actually provide the service levels. Of course, during this time, we have gone through the Great Recession and other financial and other situations that has drastically affected the original plan. We've gone back and looked and tried to recreate as best we could some details of minutia from back in 2008, 2007 through 2010, and we found that that's extremely difficult to recreate, although we're still trying. But we do have some overview and some overall reports as to where we are, as to what was promised, what has ended up, the impacts on revenue and on routes that are provided now. And we're hoping that this can at least give you a snapshot, an overview. If, of course, there is more detailed information that we need to provide, we're more than happy to continue our efforts to look for those details and to work. We worked very much with MAG to get this information. We'll continue to work to provide whatever details you would like. But we decided that it was important that we provide this overview with what we had so far. And so I'd like to turn it over now to Tyler Olson and Josh Hope from our finance and budgeting, who'll give you an overview as to the history of Prop 400. So Tyler.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, Chair Heredia, members of the boards. I'm going to be presenting for information today. As Scott mentioned, a bit of the history and the original plan, what has impacted that plan and where we're at today. Before we get started, I would like to thank our colleagues and partners at MAG for assisting us with some of the historical knowledge of the original RTP development and the maps that we've included in our presentation today. So I'll first cover the background of the original RTP and Prop 400, then what was included in that plan for service and projects, as well as the significant impact of the Great Recession that Scott mentioned, and update as to where we're at. So the original Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, was developed over 18 years ago and approved by MAG Regional Council back in 2003. This plan was a collaborative effort by MAG member agencies, the Arizona Department of Transportation, and various public and private stakeholder groups. The bus portion of that plan was developed by Valley Matra. The Regional Transportation Plan included 3 transportation modes: highways, arterials, and transit, and really was the basis of the Prop 400 plan that went to voters. The transit portion of the RTP focused on projects and regional service, multi-jurisdictional service connecting communities across the valley, and maximizing ridership and usage of that service. Prop 400 was approved by the voters in 2004, which ultimately paved the ways for freeways, streets, and arterial networks, and the light rail capital development and significant expansion of the existing bus service. Prop 400 resulted in a 0.5-cent sales tax that was split between 3 transportation modes, with transit receiving 33.3% of that tax. Prop 400 was replaced by the existing, Prop 400 replaced the existing Prop 300. The latter was very minimally transit focused. It's a 20-year tax beginning in 2006 and will sunset in 2025. A little bit on the background continued here. The Public Transportation Fund is the transit portion of Prop 400, also known as PTF. Essentially, that's 33.3% of the total revenue generated by Prop 400. It does come with state guidance on how it can be spent in the form of state statute. The state allows RPTA to spend public transportation funds on capital, maintenance, and operations. However, for Valley Metro Rail, that is very different. It's really only could be used on capital and utility relocation costs. So operations for light rail is 100% locally funded. There are no PTF funds for light rail. Shortly after Prop 400 was approved, the board adopted a policy back in 2005 to define the allocation that each agency receives of that funding. The board policy states that PTF for RPTA is 56.76%, and the remaining amount of 43.24% goes to the Valley Metro Rail program. Each agency has a financial model, also known as the Transit Life Cycle Program, TLCP, to ensure that revenues and expenditures are balanced over that period. So the next three BAPs will detail what was included in the original 2003 plan service and projects for Prop 400. Essentially what was given to our voters in 2004. So here's a look at the planned supergrid routes. Let me explain this map a bit. The green routes indicate service that's already in place prior to Prop 400, already funded previously. The red and purple routes represent additional service to be funded by Prop 400 in the plan. So supergrid routes are operated along major roads and the regional arterial grid network. Supergrid network allows for a higher level of operational efficiency than the local bus network by regionally funding these key routes at a consistent level of service across all served jurisdictions.
So Tyler, if I could, so these were the plans that were presented to the voters as was anticipated over the 20 years would be funded by Prop 400.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, with the exception of the green lines.
Which was already there.
Exactly.
Already there, okay.
So here's a look at the bus rapid transit plan for the routes included in the Prop 400 funding. There were no existing BRT routes before Prop 400. This includes express and rapid buses. And Prop 400 also was planned to pave the way for construction of today's light rail system. The original plan included over 57 miles of rail. There was no existing rail service prior to Prop 400. So moving on to the impact that the Great Recession had on our original forecast. So this chart shows the cumulative 20-year forecast for each year that's represented by the green shading, beginning with the original 2003 RTP in the first column. So the Prop 400 plan, just under $5 billion. You could see that that forecast being just around $5 billion. In 2006, that forecast was even stronger, hitting $5 billion, a little bit over. And then in 2007, you can see how we pull back a bit, but not from the original plan. But what's really happening here is the impact of the Great Recession, as you can see through years 2008 through 2010, really creating quite a significant loss to our original plan of almost $2 billion. So, you know, within the first 5 years of Prop 400, experiencing that Great Recession, not being able to forecast that, we literally lost $2 billion of our 20-year program, almost 40%. The amounts in purple represent actual collections, cumulative collections to date. So you can see by the end of our plan in 2026, will be just over $3 billion in the 20 years. So here's a closer look at the original 2003 plan versus actual collections to date and the projections for the remainder of Prop 400. So again, this was the original plan, but you could see on that previous slide that in 2006, we were actually at 5 billion, even higher projection than the RTP based on where we started. So the Great Recession and decisions made thereafter had a significant impact on the 20-year plan. It really forced member cities to prioritize service and projects in the regional plan within those revenues. Being reduced by 40%, that was significant. Based on this reprioritization, the board established jurisdictional equity requirements that had several impacts to the intent of Prop 400. It originally started out as the regional, funding of across the board, but by putting the jurisdictional equity requirements in there, it really allocated PTF to each city that took precedence over service and performance. So it really forced cities to prioritize the service within the available funds that they were allocated. And this ultimately created a barrier to establishing a more regional service. Back in 2009, the Transit Lifecycle Program Working Group was created as a result of the reprioritization and jurisdictional equity requirement. This group was made up of member city staff, Valley Metro staff, and the group was really responsible for proposing public transportation funding policy changes due to the Great Recession. So based on those recommendations, the board adopted a policy that established jurisdictional equity and how it could be monitored and maintained. Shortly thereafter, in February of 2011, the board established jurisdictional equity thresholds for each subregion. So our West Valley members are grouped into the West subregion, East Valley members in the East subregion, and then Central subregion is Phoenix. Specifically, each subregion must be within 2.5% of their collective allocation. So each member city's allocation combined with others in that region. And each member city must not be over allocated by more than $7.5 million under allocated. The board can modify or ignore these policies as needed, as has been the case in previous years. In 2019, for example, the central subregion was at 2.7% allocation, so they were slightly over that 2.5% threshold, but the board did approve that. So what was the real impact of those changes that we just discussed? On the next slide, I'm going to show you again the map of the original plan. So this is that original plan. Again, the green lines represent existing service. Go back one, please. So the green lines represent the original service that wasn't funded by Prop 400, already in place. Red and purple indicate additional service funded with Prop 400. So next slide is what is in the plan today. So this map's pretty busy, but let me simplify the colors. The gray lines represent that service that was already funded before Prop 400. Green, yellow, and orange lines represent the service that is either already funded with Prop 400 or will be by the end of the plan based on our current forecast. So the routes in red are not planned to be funded in Prop 400. This is due to the shortfalls in revenues that we experienced. You can see some of the, routes out to the Northwest Valley and, some of the routes that have been mentioned in the original RTP. There's difficult decisions that had to be made considering that 40% decrease in the 20-year revenues, in which those had to be deferred beyond Prop 400 due to those funding constraints. So for these slides, I'm going to summarize kind of the map more quantitatively, starting with our bus routes. So we had 32 super grid routes in the original plan. 24 will be in service by the end of Prop 400. For BRT, we had 13 in the original plan. We'll have 9 of those in place before the end of Prop 400. We also had fleet purchases, 23% reduction in the regional fixed route buses, 26% reduction in the regional paratransit vehicles, and reductions in other services as well, rural and van pool. For facilities, they took quite a hit. The largest of those would be to transit centers, dial-a-ride, rural bus facilities, and van pool maintenance facility. And not only did that affect RPTA, but of course, light rail was impacted by that as well. Prop 400 provided a portion of the original plan, as with the case of RPTA. Based on the completed projects and projects underway, Prop 400 will fund the capital construction, or a portion of it, of approximately 37 miles of rail versus the original plan, which was 57 miles. Prop 400 provides really a portion of the local cost for these projects, similar to bus. It's purely used to help augment the local member city contributions that go into these. When it comes to rail, we do rely heavily on federal funding as well for these projects. For the projects were not able to be funded due to these shortfalls, and the downtown Glendale extension was canceled based on member city input. So some of the key points from today's information, Prop 400 was intended to be a project and service-based plan to maximize regional service. The Great Recession resulted in a loss of revenue by approximately 40% over that 20-year period. So that loss forced member cities to make difficult decisions and resulted in board policy modifications that changed the way we program service in the region. Jurisdictional equity moved public transportation funding from more of a regional programming level based on projects and service to more of an individual city stated amount based on original projections. So with that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Hey, Tyler, thank you for the information. Any questions from board members, comments? All right. Well, thank you again. Really good information here. And if you have any further questions or comments, you can reach out to staff for that as well. We'll move on to our agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Oh.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could, just as a sidebar, and thank you, Tyler and Josh, for putting that together. We have planned in January, I believe, to have MAG come and present for the board the Momentum Plan, Momentum 2050, which is the result of the planning process for what we'd call the Prop 400 extension. So sort of as a carry-on and say, here's the history of Prop 400. Well, what does the future hold? We were planning to present that to the board, have MAG come in and present that plan to the board in January. So for your information, we'll see what the plan right now is and what the hopes and expectations are for post Prop 400, and if we can get an extension of that tax.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Yeah, that's a great topic for discussion. I'm sure we all have questions and comments on what's happening with the Prop 400 extension process. So we'll hear that in January then. Thank you. Next item, quarterly reports. Again, this is for information purposes. Any questions or comments from any board member? All right. Next item, number 10, travel expenditures and solicitations. Again, for informational purposes, any questions or comments from board members? Okay. Number 11, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Any current events or items that a board member has for the future? Hearing none. The next meeting of our joint board is scheduled for Thursday, January 20th, 2022, 11:15. This concludes the agenda items for today's joint meeting. There's no further questions. This meeting is adjourned. Right. We'll move on to our next meeting. Hanging everybody online. We have next meeting, Valley Matra RPTA. Again, we'll follow the same process for our action items. First item is public comment. Pat, do we have somebody there?
Yes, Mr. Crowley.
Perfect. Mr. Crowley, you have 3 minutes.
Got something specific to the meeting where we're at that I need to also cover.
Chair, do you want to give him 3 minutes or his additional request?
I did not hear.
He
His
he
request.
requests, he's requesting an additional 1.5 minutes, so asking for 4.5 minutes.
Sure.
All right, thank you. First off, whenever I come in,
Go ahead.
We can't hear him.
I don't know if he's speaking, Pat, but can't hear the.
Mr. Chair, the microphone went dead, so we're getting him a new microphone.
All right.
Oh, just a minute and we will fix it.
All right.
Four and a half.
Go for it, Mr. Crowley.
They only have me down for 4, and you said I could have 4.5.
All right, you can start.
Okay, all right. Why don't you put it at 5 and I'll stop at 4.5.
Just start, Mr. Crowley. You
All
have
right.
4.5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to point out that every time I come into this building, I'm made sure to reminded that I need to be wearing a mask. Now, we'll call it the staff board that's sitting at the dais. You'll notice that none of them have a mask on. Now, some have masks with them, but if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Also, this is supposedly a public hearing, right? Well, your Zoom document is perfect for your board staff to see who's doing what here, but there's nothing in the public section that shows you or what you're doing. From my seat, it's almost 75 feet from the major one, and if I look over the lady's shoulder, it's still 8 feet. And since you guys are having this for the public, not staff, is there a reason this other unit here couldn't show the Zoom meeting? As I said, where I sit, I can't see you. And I believe that it's supposed to be a part of the whole thing. Okay, and now on the current versus the old one, did you see anything in there about the cutbacks to rail? Now, they said that there's unfunded, but we're progressing on each one of those because you feel that you're going to get the money down the road. And if they're totally unfunded, then why are we doing stuff with them and putting out millions for planning, et cetera? In your meeting, you had the rail component and what they want to do along the central corridor or the government corridor. Well, I have a problem with that. I went to go to the Phoenix Council meeting, but I didn't know that you have to call in ahead and can only do it by phone. So I wasn't able to point out to them that not one single one of your stops is multimodal, as in, why is the bus and the rail meeting together? Well, your central station one is a couple blocks away. You do have one proposed for on 7th Avenue, and then the others are there in front of the Capitol. We have buses on 19th Avenue, 15th Avenue, 7th Avenue, and Central. When you're building the rail, why aren't you being multimodal? And I understand part of it is that it would be inconvenient for the rail to put like that 15th Avenue stop. Whenever anybody is using any of our systems, when they step off, what are they? Pedestrians. And you want to make it as hard as possible so that they integrate and get the job done. With your showing of the super grid routes and plans, they've got the Wickenburg connector on there. You took that out in 06. And Rui, I know you're working hard as hell to get it back put together, but why is that bus gone? when you say how much has been cut back for the bus and you said, well, we had to change, and where is the stuff on rail? Where was the rail cutbacks? Where was the rail changes? Because all I see is expansions. And then lastly, on your document that the rail will be dealing with, it says currently approved adopted regional high capacity transit. And it has the Paradise Valley and it has downtown Glendale, two of which are no longer anything part of it. So when you show that, what is it that you're doing? Is it a Ponzi scheme? Which one is it going to be under? I need you guys to get this multimodal. I need you to do the job that you're supposed to do. And remember that when you're putting together Prop 500, to finish what you should have done in Prop 400, and why I would like to be a part of those that write it, since I do know the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. We'll move on to our next item, our consent agenda. It's presented for action. There is one item, LED lighting upgrade, and our two items are minutes and then the LED lighting upgrade at the Mesa Bus Operation Maintenance Facility. I asked any board members if they have any comments or questions. Hearing none, I request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, Bridget Peterson, motion to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Second.
Second, Jeff Brown, Queen Creek.
Thank you, Councilmember. Request Pat to take a roll call.
Vice Mayor Malone,
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman, Mayor Hartke,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorsey, Mayor Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Tomachoff,
Aye.
Councilmember Stipp,
Aye.
Councilmember Heredia,
Aye.
Councilmember Pastor,
Aye.
Councilmember Brown,
Aye.
Mayor Ortega, Councilmember Winters,
Aye.
Councilmember Gomez, Mayor Pereira,
Yes.
Mayor LaVault.
Yes.
Chair, the motion passes.
Perfect. Thank you. Next item, number 3, Valley Metro RPTA bus advertising program. I'll have Mr. Scott Smith present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As most of you on the board are aware, some who are new may not be, but from the date of its inception, Valley Metro RPTA has not allowed, by policy, external advertising on our buses. Valley Metro Rail has, for many years, included external advertising. Several months ago, the issue was raised about the potential for advertising and the revenue that might be related to that, and asked staff to study and present for the board's consideration changes to this policy. We've gone through several different exercises to gather information, not only as to what is possible, but throughout the industry and here locally, where the city of Phoenix has had advertising on their buses for many, many years. Utilizing our experience in the rail and what we've learned from other agencies around the country and locally here from the city of Phoenix, we are here to present to you proposals to change that policy and to implement or allow advertising on the exterior of RPTA's buses. There are 2 actions before you to accomplish this, and I will turn it over to Hillary Foos, who's been leading the effort and knows this program inside and out, to present to you the proposals and give you more of the background. Hillary.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for your time today.
We will be going over several items as part of today's discussion. I'll be giving you an overview of the recommended program. I will be talking to you about the contract and revenue opportunities, the actions being sought today. As Scott said, there's two, as well as some of the discussions that are underway with your city staff. Just a reminder, we did talk to the board extensively about this topic back in the spring earlier this year, and really based on your feedback from that meeting, feedback from the management committee, our industry research, also talking extensively with the city of Phoenix. They've been great answering all of our various questions and being very responsive to us as we embark on this. We are presenting to you a recommended plan that really takes a very balanced approach based on the feedback we've received, seeking to balance revenue. We seek to enhance the revenue that the agency generates, as well as items related to branding and safety. Safety related to, we've heard from our safety professionals, in the organization, and so I'll be going into that here in a moment. So what's in front of you is an overview of the program being recommended. We are recommending exterior bus advertising for local fixed route buses and circulators, really as determined by those circulator cities. And so we are talking with your city staff about, if you have a circulator operating in your city, the interest that you may have now or maybe into the future. Again, to be clear, this program can evolve. We can change the policy, and us and Outfront can be flexible as we move forward, as we explore advertising on the RPTA fleet. We are recommending ad displays that really prioritize enhancing revenue while also prioritizing branding and window visibility, trying to keep as much of the windows available while also allowing advertising to exist. Another important element here is consistency with the advertising standards established in the region. And the standards are those that really guide the content. And we heard a lot of feedback from the board in April about how do we determine content. And it's really these standards that help us determine what we approve, what we disapprove. On Valley Metro Rail, and also we're consistent with the city of Phoenix. And so as we move forward here, the advertising policy that's being recommended for approval has consistent regional advertising standards as part of that policy. The contract mechanism that we're recommending here, that's part of the actions in front of you today, is to utilize the existing advertising sales services agreement with Outfront Media. Outfront's been a great partner to Valley Metro Rail, and actually through some foresight of staff back in 2014 and 2015, we included bus advertising as potential scope additions for the future, thinking that the idea that this discussion may just happen into the future as revenue for RPTA might be in the future. And so we can easily pick up and use the advertising sales services agreement with Outfront for this exact scope. Outfront has committed to maintaining the revenue share of 65% of net advertising, which is the same rate that we have for Valley Metro Rail, and is very commensurate with our peers in the industry, both with the city of Phoenix and our peers nationally. And based on some early revenue projections from Outfront, obviously they're in it to generate as much revenue as we are with a revenue share relationship. They estimate that after about a 12-month ramp-up period, that we could generate somewhere between $600,000 to $700,000 annually for Valley Metro RPTA. One thing to note here, what's not included in these costs is that, and we spoke about this a good amount at our spring discussion, is that we have a contractor, we contract for operations with First Transit and others. And so there will be labor associated with those contracts to help us administer this program. And so we continue to coordinate with our contractor, but the numbers here do not include those potential costs, which could include additional position or two on behalf of our contractor. Next slide. So the TMC did take these actions, and the actions before you today are two. to adopt the Valley Metro RPTA advertising policy is actually to rescind the no advertising policy that Valley Metro RPTA has historically had, and to adopt an advertising policy that was the attachment to the memo here today. The policy essentially outlines the available assets available as part of the program, as well as the advertising standards that really guide the approval and disapproval of content, like what would be those ads that are on the sides of our buses. The second action item is to utilize the advertising sales services agreement with Outfront Media through June of 2023. We have an active agreement with Outfront Media through that time, and that'll allow us to get a program started to really explore bus advertising on Valley Metro RPTA operated fleet. And then in 2022, we can decide with your staff how we want to move forward. We can execute the final 3-year option that we have available with Outfront, or we can decide to do a full competitive procurement process. And we will talk with your staff about that as we move forward into next year. And just for full transparency, we are talking with your city staff, and we'll continue to on a couple additional items. There was conversation at our last meeting about, are there any city sign ordinances or policies that prevent us from moving forward? And we've talked with your staff that we are clear to move ahead. While some cities do have somewhat strong sign ordinances or policies, none of them prevent us from moving forward. They're usually associated with fixed assets. Obviously, our program is very mobile. And we are talking with your cities about whether or not, for those that have circulators, whether or not there's interest in including them in the program. So far, we've heard from Mesa related to their Buzz circulator. And also the revenue allocation model. There's a couple options that we as staff have thrown out. And, you know, here at Valley Metro, we're pretty indifferent into how the revenue is allocated. There's an annual revenue mile allocation that we've suggested, as well as a regional services allocation as well. And we will talk to the staff we have, and we'll continue to talk to the staff about those options through the financial working group. And so far in our discussions, the annual revenue mile allocation, which is one that we use for other credits, seems to be coming out as a preference, but hasn't been determined yet. And so with that, I know that was a very quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Hillary. Any questions or comments? I see on the chat, the Tempe has a message from the council member, Arredondo Savage, but if anyone has any questions or comments first, or I'll just go through to Tempe's comments from the councilwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know it's somewhat unusual for a proxy that's not an elected official to comment, so I appreciate the opportunity to read Councilmember Arredondo's comments. She said that Tempe is in support of the annual revenue mile allocation model for allocation. Because the majority of Tempe's service is locally funded, it's important to us that our costs to provide service are offset by this new source of revenue, which would help provide some relief to our local transit fund. We believe the revenue mile allocation model is fair and a fair and consistent model to distribute revenue across jurisdictions and aligns with the way other revenues and costs are allocated today. Tempe would support a revised approach to advertising to utilize additional space on the vehicles, more so in alignment with the model used by the City of Phoenix on their buses, in the interest of maximizing potential revenues from the new advertising program. That's the conclusion of Councilmember Arredondo's comments. Thank you again for allowing me to read them.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see on the chat, Councilwoman Pastor, you have a question around why not maximizing revenue by limiting the size. want to further add to that comment?
Yeah, I think we're limiting our revenue by not expanding the size we're limiting the size of advertisement. As stated right now, currently, the city of Phoenix wraps their buses and doesn't limit their area. There's certain things that we do due to excessive heat safety pieces, but we've worked all those pieces out, and we wrap our windows. So we advertise on, it's a full wrap, and very similar to the light rail. So I'm questioning as to why we're not doing that. And we have policy on it. I mean, I can send our what we put in.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Does Hillary or Scott want to answer any of that? I know we have a couple comments.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Pastor, thank you for the question. Yes, we are recommending advertising types that do stay between the wheels. And that is because based on several factors, based on what we heard from this board and also the management committee in past discussions, trying to create that balance of concerns related to branding and safety, also in consultation with our safety professionals. And I know Adrienne Reese stepped up here to the table if we want to hear her feedback. And so that is our recommendation from this group. I'll also say that we did consult with Outfront based on, I know we were, for full transparency, to understand if we were taking the more of the City of Phoenix approach or a less restrictive model, what could we generate? And it was a little above $1 million a year was the estimation. And let me couch that a little bit. We have about half the fleet that City of Phoenix does. So that number lines up with what the City of Phoenix does generate. The City of Phoenix program generates about $2 million a year for their bus advertising program. So that number lines up with that. And but based on the feedback of this board and also what we see from the industry and what we're learning even on Valley Metro Rail, that we really feel strongly that this is a balanced approach, and that's why we presented it to you as such today.
Real quick, before I know Councilwoman Tomachoff has to leave us here, and she has a comment. So, Bill, Councilmember Stipp, I'll get back to you. But Councilwoman Tomachoff.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me cut in front of Bill. I've got to moderate a session for NLC here in a few minutes. My comment is the slide deck that you presented in the CEO's report showed the holiday bus not between the wheels. So I'm just wondering, is it just because there's no safety issue when you're doing a holiday wrap? That doesn't generate any revenue. So I didn't understand the lack of consistency in what we're being told. And I'm not aware of any derogatory feedback from the board about, basically following the discussions that we've had publicly are that the average person, can identify who a bus belongs to, whether it's a City of Phoenix bus that's fully wrapped or a Valley Metro bus that's, currently, that's one of the reasons why I think we decided to pursue the advertising is that, people don't really know the difference between whose bus it is. Whether, the advertising buses that Phoenix is using come into Glendale, and we don't have residents, getting upset saying, why is there advertising on they don't know who the bus belongs to. So people seem to be fine with the advertising. And my last question, if I could, is if there are safety issues, I'd like to know, what data there is to support the fact that it's a safety issue to, put more advertising on the bus.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Tomachoff, you're right. We did show you a bus with a full wrap on it, and we will be adjusting that based on this program. And we do have Adrian Reese here, who's our Director of Safety and Security, and and I know Scott.
Yeah, and just want to make it clear, if you look in the advertising policy, we're not stating that, that advertising over windows is completely excluded. We just are looking to limit it and not, and again, I know that other cities, including Phoenix, do limit the full wrap. So it's not a complete exclusion. And as Hillary said, we're also looking at this as a starting place. So there is an evolution, and we'll try and find where that balance is.
Right.
It's not an all or nothing. We're going to look and see how it works, and we'll ease into it. So that's why we haven't excluded anything. We've just tried to say where the starting point is, and based on feedback and everything, we said we're going to start limited and then we can expand. But I'll turn it over to Adrian because she gave us input in relation to safety concerns. Adrian is our Director of Safety and Security, as you know, works closely with police and is a retired police lieutenant herself. So Adrian.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'll preface this with it only has to happen once. As a security professional and safety professional, from the perspective of security as well as safety, meaning intentional acts and unintentional acts, covering a window or restricting visibility in or out is never recommended for a public asset. Considering the fact that police officers responding to an intentional act where they possibly know some details really need to be able to see inside that asset. So restricting it to the point that they cannot see inside limits their capability. Also thinking of acts that we don't know about. We have passenger vehicles as well as peace officers that may be near an asset, vehicle, bus or train. If they can't see inside, there can't be a proactive response, meaning that something could be occurring inside the asset that 911 hasn't been alerted to yet. And by being able to see in, there may be an opportunity to reduce the severity of injury. So primarily the covering of windows or covering of vehicles, public assets in general, is never a recommended procedure for security or safety. We do have a couple of incidents that have occurred where our riders inside trains and buses, believing their stop, they have arrived at their stop, meaning they've had a verbal message and the vehicle has stopped, not knowing that it's actually at a light. Because they could not see outside the vehicle, they stood up, the vehicle then proceeded forward and they fell. So we have a fall injury as a result. So we really want to limit the visibility restrictions inside and outside the assets as much as possible.
Okay, I'll pass it over to Councilmember Stipp. Your comments.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, I have to echo the comments made by Councilmember Pastor about the consistency issue. And, you know, I think respectfully disagree with both Mr. Smith and on the comment that we're not restricting it. The policy says advertising on buses is limited to exterior display. That's limited. That means there is no other option. So we are limiting it. So I think there's a challenge with saying, well, this is the starting point. I think we can say procedurally, or you know, we're going to start small and work big, but our policy, which we are constantly hit over the head with, is it is limited to between the wheels. So number one. Number two, are we saying that the city of Phoenix buses are completely unsafe because they're allowed to be wrapped fully? Are we saying that the light rail trains are completely unsafe because they are fully wrapped, but only the Valley Metro buses are going to be partially wrapped? I mean, the inconsistency here is really kind of disturbing. And then, you know, we talk about in the advertising standards, the policy says Valley Metro RPTA is and will continue to be consistent with the Valley Metro Rail and Phoenix. We are not consistent when 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs before that, we put in a limiting factor. I'm not a thinking that this revenue is going to save the day. But the resistance that we're getting from the Valley Metro staff on this issue over time is quite honestly a little disturbing. I really think if we need to do it, we need to do the exact same for the rail, and we need to do the same thing for the bus, and it needs to be consistent throughout the entire valley. And if all of the buses are wrapped, all the buses are wrapped. If there's a safety issue, then I think there needs to be higher coordination with the city of Phoenix and what they're doing on their buses. This is not I believe in my travels into other major metropolitan areas, the expectation is that there is advertising on public transit apparatus. I've never been to anywhere that doesn't have any. And I went back to what started this was we're missing an opportunity. And I agree with Councilmember Arredondo Savage about how we distribute these funding. The city of Goodyear is going to get very little benefit from this, but I believe regionally, the entire system will benefit from the increased revenue, which I understand is anywhere between the 600,000 that we've been told and up to 1.6 million, depending on how we wrap it. And that information hasn't been provided to us. We got one one revenue estimate, and it was at the 600,000. I asked at the AFS meeting to see all of the options that we were presented as an organization, and that was completely ignored during this presentation. So obviously I'm a little hot about that. But on this particular issue, I hope we move forward. If we're going to make a change, we have to change the policy that was presented, because right now we're limiting it to just between the wheels. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Mr. Chair.
We have another comment, or Scott, you wanna?
Yeah, I would like to address, thank you, Councilmember Stipp, and I would like to respectfully disagree with your respectful disagreement. If you read the vehicle advertising, what you're talking about is the advertising on buses is limited to exterior display. That just means that this policy only covers advertising that is on the exterior of the bus. It does not limit the advertising. A little bit below that, we talk about how products that cover the windows can only be placed on up to 25%. So we don't exclude window coverings. We're trying to limit those as a beginning point to see how it works. So window coverings are not excluded. If I may be wrong, but I don't think that City of Phoenix puts wraps on every one of their vehicles, but we use this as a starting point. They're part of the reason for our concern, and if we had to start over again on Valley Metro Rail, we would revisit our complete wrap, because we have had incidences and issues and legal, as Adrian brought up, where the wraps over the windows have created safety issues. Those are real. I can't speak for the City of Phoenix. They can make their own decisions, and I respect those decisions. We are just trying to say, if we had to start from scratch, which we are, what would we, in our professional experience and what we've looked at, what would we propose? And that's what we're proposing. We're not trying to bias anything or move toward it. As far as your last comment, I do believe that Hillary did state that Upfront did give us an updated revenue number, and she said that if the full program were implemented, the revenue projection would be just slightly over $1 million. She did state that in her presentation. And so we start from if we went $600,000 to $800,000, if we adopted, let's say, the Phoenix full-blown all over, Upfront, in their professional opinion, believes that it could generate up to or upwards to maybe $200,000 to $300,000 in additional revenue. So I tell you that we have tried to, from our professional background, tried to give the board what we believe is a balanced approach based on things that we have learned and based on things that we have studied. We're certainly not trying to sway one way or another. We are indifferent, but we believe these suggestions are based on the results of that study. And obviously, if the board decides to go a different policy, we will implement whatever policy the board decides, absolutely to the best of our ability. So I did have to add that to that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. I think Councilmember Jeff Brown.
Oh, and if I could, once again, I don't believe that the 1.6 million has ever been put out. City of Phoenix generates around $2 million. They have confirmed that, and with a bus fleet that's half of what City of Phoenix is, we believe that the $1 million that for the full blown that Outfront has given us is reasonable based on the size of the fleets and the coverage of the fleets.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Jeff Brown?
Thank you. I'll state that I too read the report as Mr. Smith just did in the allowance of up to 25% window coverage. And I think that's a very reasonable and deliberative, moderate stance. Policy, of course, can be changed later. This would have my support today as is proposed. And if we want to look at it in a year to see if at that point people want to do more coverage of the windows, then so be it, because policies can be changed. I know it was said that maybe people feel as though they get hit over the head with policy. Well, then you change that policy. I don't think there's any reason for any of us to be hot about this. Let's move forward. Let's take the very moderate, reasonable approach and revisit it later if that is the wish of the board a year from now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other comments or question?
Chair, it looks like Councilmember Pastor has a comment and/or question. Please provide the safety information.
That's right. Councilwoman? Do you want to expand on that
I
comment?
would like to ask Adrian if she worked with the City of Phoenix and our safety or police officers in seeing if our wraps were unsafe, and at what degree were they unsafe, and what information and documentation is available for us to make a decision on that.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I would be happy to provide that. I can speak specifically from my own experience since 2006, 2007, when I was with Phoenix PD and in the position as the lieutenant for the growing Police Transit Bureau or Transit Enforcement Unit. As we had these discussions back then, and it was my position as a law enforcement professional that windows should not be covered to the extent that they're reducing the visibility in or out to a degree over at least the 25% currently that we have. For the reason I stated initially, the only has to happen once statement is what I led with for the purpose of data-wise. I'd be happy to ask PD for any data they've had, especially in Phoenix, since they are dedicated in Phoenix for bus and transit. If they've had any specific incidences or experiences where they could not see inside a bus when they were responding to it. If they haven't, I would then default back to my original statement of it only has to happen once. So from a safety and security professional, it has always been my stance that covering windows to the detail that you limit the visibility in or out to a heavy degree, it's restricted, is never a positive outcome for a responding officer or security, or even from a proactive stance with folks who are in traffic every day, may happen to see something occurring inside a bus and be able to actually intervene or call 911 and help out. From the position inside, our riders need to be able to see outside as well. And I think this presentation here was, again, not intended to completely block the windows or visibility, but to look at it from a small perspective of there is the ability to have it 25%, but no more than that. But really, we want to be careful and cautious in limiting visibility in or out of our public assets.
Thank you for that comment. Just because of I feel uncomfortable in taking a vote today, and I'll explain why. Just because of this dialogue that we just had, I want to understand, I want to take the time to be able to understand the difference between now that I'm hearing there's possible safety issues and Phoenix buses are unsafe. I want to take the time at least and table this until the next meeting so that I can bring Valley Metro and the city of Phoenix and our safety department and everybody to say, this is what I heard at this meeting. We need to be consistent because we are a regional transit system. It doesn't matter if they're taking a bus from Tempe all the way to Glendale. They don't know that that's a Tempe bus, that's a Phoenix bus, and that's a Glendale bus. All they know is it's a bus, and I feel like there needs to be consistency across the board. So I don't know how to do that in making a motion to continue this item, or I guess
There's a
it's a
couple.
motion.
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman. There's a couple other comments from other members. Mayor Peterson and
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, and I agree, I think there might be still a few outstanding questions and comments that need to be covered before we move on with this. My question is, and I apologize if I missed it in the presentation, when and how would we be getting reporting back on this? And can someone explain, I love the fact that Valley Metro is running this program and that the cities and towns will gain some revenue from it. What does Valley Metro gain from this too? Because I'm afraid that the program's going to get much bigger and that it's going to entail more staff. And how do we make sure that we have the funds available to pay for that staff? So I guess that's a couple questions wrapped up in there, please.
Thank you, Mayor Peterson and Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'll try and answer that. This is one area that we work closely with City of Phoenix and trying to understand the type of oversight that is required for this program. It will take staff oversight. I think when we look at these, both on our side and also from our contractor, we do not have an actual number yet back from the contractor because part of it was trying to decide what the extent of the program would be as far as what they would need to do. I'm assuming that there would be a cost related to that. And there would also be a cost related to whatever we would need to do. When we talk about the revenue numbers, those are gross revenue numbers to us. Any additional costs that would be incurred by us or the contractor would be covered by those. So, whether that's $5 or $200,000, you can take those revenue estimates to $600,000 to $800,000 or $1 million if we were to go full bore on this and deduct whatever costs would be incurred by both Valley Metro and the contractor. Our rough estimates, I don't even know if I want to throw a number out, but it's going to be, it'll be, substantial, but not huge. But the net of that number would then be the number that would be available to be distributed out or credited out to the cities through that revenue miles. So when we look at these numbers, whether it be $600,000 or $1 million, the net number that would be available is less than that because we'd have to, of course, have the program pay for itself. And then those numbers would be spread out after that.
so would I think so. What we're hearing from the board, I think the overall advertising, we want to see advertising on light rail and Valley Metro buses, right? I think so. Could we have a compromise here where we maybe move and maybe recommend what we have today and discuss further what if it's 25% or if it's full wrap on our next agenda early next year. But I think staff has worked in per board's direction to try to get this going, and I think we would like to see something going and set up the groundwork. But could we maybe vote today on these items so that staff can move forward in as far as questions around how much do we wrap, I think, and what's that information entail, how much revenue we're going to have, and what's the safety implications that we can discuss in our next meeting? Is that a compromise that we can have today so that staff can move forward with this and maybe we can vote and tweak in a next agenda? Does that sound okay?
Chair, I could support it.
Okay. All right, so I'll I'll request a motion in a second. So we have two items here, one on the policy and then the advertising sales service with Outfront. So we'll do the 3A, the policy. So request a motion and a second. And to discuss, maybe to bring it back, I don't know what the phrasing we should have, Mr. Manow or somebody at Valley Metro. Could you all help us on the language there, or what we can come back and discuss with more information on what we end up as far as the additional information on the policy as far as the coverage of it.
Mr. Chair, this is Scott, if I could offer a suggestion. I mean, in a lot of ways, the market's going to determine what we can and can't sell. Well, what I might suggest if you're doing is we start this and get out front out there to start seeing what the market is, start selling ads. We'll start putting them on. As we said, this probably doesn't preclude window wraps. That was sort of our compromise with our safety people, is we didn't want to totally preclude it, but we didn't want to go all in. And so we arrived at that 25% thinking that was sort of a compromise of the compromise. And what we would do is even on a monthly or quarterly basis, we can report back to you basically what ads Outfront is able to sell and what the implication is. And we can also report to you how we are as it relates to the 25% full wrap. We may never reach that if we can't sell those. If we can, we'd be more than happy to report the activity on both the revenue and the sales and where we are. And if we find that 100% of our of the potential is to have a full wrap, we can come back to you and say, here's what's going on. And then we can adjust the policy to meet what the market is, if that's what you'd like. And we can do that as monthly or quarterly or bi-monthly, however often you'd like.
Rob.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill.
Councilmember Sip.
Okay, what I'd like to, I think you have to do this in two different motions. Obviously not an attorney, but I think this is two motions. So the first motion would be to have the board of directors amend the RPTA's no advertising policy. And that policy be brought back to the board in January for final review. That way we amend the policy that says no advertising and we get it finalized in January after all these get done. So staff can get started. We know nothing's going to happen during December anyway, so, but at least we at least get the no advertising policy rescinded.
So that's your motion, Councilmember?
Rescind the no advertising policy and bring the formal policy back to the board in January for final approval.
Bridget Peterson, I'll second that.
And
I have an alternate motion.
who was that?
Councilmember Brown.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
I would move that Board of Directors amend the no advertising policy to adopt the proposed Valley Metro RPTA advertising policy as per the published documents of today and the chair's commitment to quarterly reporting.
I'll amend my second to that motion. Is that legal, Mike Murnau?
Okay. So,
Mr. Chair,
now how do we handle these dual motions here?
Mr. Chair, there is a motion on the floor that was made by Councilmember Stipp. That is
that's the first one.
Yes, that is the motion. That is.
So I'm sorry, Mike. Mayor Peterson rescinded her second to that motion and moved it to the motion from Councilmember Brown. So the first motion would die with the lack of a second.
I have a second for the first motion.
Okay, so the first motion is the motion on the floor is made by Councilmember Stipp and seconded by Councilmember Pastor. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we take the second motion first and then the first motion.
Okay. So do we vote for that motion first, right?
Yes.
All right, Pat, do you mind taking the roll call?
Second motion, Pat.
Point of order, which motion are we taking a vote on?
Do the second
we're-
motion first.
Okay, so we need to take the second motion first. That was by Councilmember Brown and Mayor Peterson. Because the recension of the motion, the second by Mayor Peterson. So the second now becomes the first motion that we will take.
Thank you.
Okay, so this motion that you're voting on is amend the no advertising policy and adopt the proposed as published and request that the chair of the RPTA board commit to quarterly reporting on this item. Okay, Vice Mayor Malone. Councilmember Goodman. Mayor Hartke.
I'm a yes.
Vice Mayor Dorsey. Mayor Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Tomachoff has left the meeting. Councilmember Stipp.
Nay.
Councilmember Heredia.
Yes.
Councilmember Pastor.
No.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Mayor Ortega. Councilmember Winters. I'm sorry, Councilmember.
Point of order.
No.
You can.
I have you recorded as a no, Councilmember Winters. Councilmember Gomez. Mayor Pereira.
Yes.
Mayor LaVault.
Yes.
I don't know that we have a quorum.
This is
Good
Vice
night.
Mayor
I'm
Malone.
sorry,
8 votes.
I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Malone. I couldn't hear you.
Mine is a no. Did you get that?
Sorry, what was that?
So Vice Mayor Malone, I have you as a no. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, we have a quorum. We have 10.
Pat, do we have enough people?
Yes, there are 10 board members responding on the call, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yeses and 4 nos. The motion passes with 6.
So I think the first motion moved, right?
This motion passes and makes the second motion not heard.
Because it's a replacement motion.
Now we have the second item on the recommendation, Chair, item B.
Okay, item 3B, request a motion and a second to approve the contract.
So moved.
Perfect. Who was that?
Jeff Brown, so moved.
Councilmember Brown.
Hey, Pereira seconds.
Second, we'll ask Pat to take up roll call vote.
Okay, Vice Mayor Malone?
Did you hear me? I was up. Yes.
Yes, okay. Councilmember Goodman? Mayor Hartke?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorsey? Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Stipp?
Yes.
Councilmember Heredia?
Yes.
Councilmember Pastor?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Mayor Ortega? Councilmember Winters?
Yes.
Councilmember Gomez? Mayor Pereira?
Yes.
Mayor LaVault?
Yes.
Motion passes, Chair.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody.
Mr. Chair, if I could, this is Scott. I'm sorry this issue, which I was We had obviously no intention of having it be as controversial, and we understand there's questions and a bit of confusion out there. We will do our very best to work with the board and your staff and the chairs to implement this as transparently, quickly, and as taking into account all of the comments that are made, because there were certainly some legitimate questions in that. So, I apologize and want to let you know that we will over communicate how this is implemented and let you know what we're learning and what's going on, so we can hopefully answer many of the concerns and the questions of members of the board.
Thank you, Scott, for mentioning. Yeah, if we can answer some of the points that were brought up here, especially around safety, the costs, the revenue, and those items, I think those are going to be important aspects on how the success of this program goes on. So thank you for those comments. Next item, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Anyone have anything to add on this? Hearing none, next meeting, Thursday, January 20, 2022, 11:15. So thank you, everybody. Sorry for a long meeting here. I think you appreciate for you sticking on, and those on via Mars stick on for a couple more minutes here.
Thank you, Chair. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
You too. Happy Thanksgiving. Pat, we safe to start here? You're on mute, Pat.
Councilmember Pastor, are you still on the call?
And I lost her.
Yep.
I don't think we have quorum without her, right?
Mr. Paniagua, are you available to represent the city of Phoenix? Mr. Sapien, are you available to represent the city of Phoenix?
This is Mario.
Hi, Mario. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We're ready to go, Chair.
All right. Do you want to do a quick roll call, Pat?
Sure. Right. Mayor Kevin Hartkey, City of Chandler.
Here.
Councilmember Francisco Heredia, City of Mesa.
Here.
Mario Paniagua, City of Phoenix.
Here.
And Stephen Methan, City of Tempe.
Here, Pat.
Great, thank you. We're ready, Chair.
All right, perfect. First item, public comments. Anyone from the public care to comment here? This is the time. Pat?
Yes, Chair. We have a couple of people who would like to provide comment today. Blue Crowley is at the podium.
I'll go last if
No,
they're.
just go, you're already there.
All right.
You got 3 minutes, Blue.
You got it. The incident table on the current quarter of the Valley Metro Light Rail document, it has in here all the major offenses, the crimes that have been committed on the rail. And one of the situations here is code of conduct. That's the major ones. Do you know what some of the code of conduct stuff is? I don't have the document here, but you can be cited for dawdling at the 19th and Dunlap station, because the way you've made it is if you use the rail, you get to the station, you leave. You don't stay here. You don't check the yard out. You have to go. Another one, you have your radio on. I was talking to one of the staff of Tempe one day and pointed that out to him, that you can't have your radio on. If anybody can hear your radio, it's a citation of code of conduct. I find them not to be what they should be, but when you list that there are 300 and some, and then you list where they are. Could you also break it down on what they did? Because it's a big number, and I'm glad that you get it done, but what can I say? Also on that document of what's currently happening with Prop 400, I also asked to find out what was cut back from the rail, et cetera. Well, you say there's a $2 billion shortfall, then 900 million of that would have been rail. Where are the $900 million in cutbacks? And then when you say on the back of the document that these are not funded, but you're still progressing with them. A not funded bus route is what? Not done. So when I see what you put out here, I find it to be smoke and mirrors and not what it should be. That when you're talking about how well your security people are doing, like I said, that 300 number of code of conduct, could you break it down on each one of the violations? Because if somebody was dawdling at the 19th and Dunlap station and it's a code of conduct violation, and that's the major area, you know, at the end of the line, what use are you? I had a friend that you guys assaulted. He was sent to jail because they said he had assaulted them. What it was is he went to hand the card to him. It fell to the ground. He put his foot on it at the same time, and you guys had him arrested for assaulting a police officer. Your Ally Burton aren't police officers. They're just wannabes, just like yourself used to be.
All right. Mr. Crowley, thank you. And just want to reiterate, let's try to be respectful with our comments here. Appreciate your comments, but let's try to be respectful. Pat, who else do we have?
Trent Collicott? Oh, sorry.
Actually, you're pretty right on.
Okay.
Good afternoon, board. Thank you for your time. My name is Trent Collicott. I'm the general manager of the Residence Inn and Courtyard Marriott, just down the street, actually. I come to you to respectfully lodge some comments. You know, the pandemic in the hotel business really shut down a lot of our revenue for the last year and a half. And as we try to be a good neighbor to the light rail construction that's going on virtually right outside our front door and down the street, you know, I want to make sure that we continue to collaborate well and have an understanding that works for both parties. You know, as an entity, our ownership and myself supported publicly the light rail extension, voted thus forth. Anyone who was local that could vote on it did. So, you know, my comments are coming from a place of someone who is in support of the light rail extension. What I would like the board to recognize, however, is that there's some scheduled work that's soon to be happening on the line, saw cutting on First Avenue and also on Central, less than a half a block away from our properties, that is scheduled to take place in the middle of the night. I understand that it's difficult to saw cut a track, you know, obviously when trains are in needing of that track during the day. But, you know, if we can find a way to find a resolution that's beneficial to both parties, if we could not have it happen at 2 a.m, if we could, you know, if there's a ways to extend out the timeline of the work to have less of a hindrance of the overnight hours, I would respectfully request that. The whole process really felt like it was kind of snuck in the middle of the night. I received an email on October 30th, which is a Saturday, indicating that that work was scheduled to begin on Sunday, the night of the 31st. So I got 0 days notice that it was happening. It didn't start when they said it was going to. Thankfully, so we did have an opportunity such as this to voice our concerns to you all. So, you know, if we're going to have a collaborative relationship, supporting each other and, you know, supporting the light rail, supporting our business, it would just be nice to have a relationship that doesn't feel like I'm not an equal partner or that, you know, I'm not, you know, beneficial to what's happening. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Pat, did you say we have someone
One more.
else?
Yes, Billy Shields.
Go ahead, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Look, I'm an investment partner with the Marriott Residence Inn that Trent is the general manager of, and as well as the Singhai building on 27 West Madison. For over 10 years, I've served on the board of the Downtown Partnership and as co-chair of the Phoenix Community Alliance, Central City Planning and Development Committee. In all these roles, it is in all these roles that I speak for many businesses and property owners in downtown Phoenix. I'm also a member of the North Central CAB, but I'm not here to speak in that role. But I mention it to you to let you know that I'm fully committed to your efforts to complete the rail and keep the businesses and the public safe and operating. But I'm here to make you aware, as Trent pointed out but the myriad of constant issues that arise for the downtown businesses along the construction route of the light rail. But mainly the lack of communication, of accurate communications, the construction schedule as it applies to extreme noise and disruptive activities. But also the lack of cooperation of Kiewit when we express concerns of our business operations. I would say that your contractor has a cavalier attitude to our concerns, and I'm not alone in that assessment. I know that there are contract provisions that cause you and the taxpayers to pay the contractor for outreach and coordination activities with the affected businesses. I would say that for several years that was working as well as possible. We worked out many issues with the contractor early on. We were kept apprised of work that would disrupt our businesses. And when we expressed concerns, staff worked with us as well as they could. And this all came to an abrupt end last summer. And after somehow surviving the pandemic shutdown, the businesses that survived are finally able to see some daylight. This is a horrible time for Kiewit to change the practice of cooperation and not fulfill their contractual obligations to you, the board. So I ask you, what changed? Why did that change? Why does a general manager of a convention hotel get an email on a Saturday night that very loud and all-night saw cutting will commence and last for a month or longer, and that work will start the following day, and that Kiewit would be kind enough to drop off a box of earplugs for his guests? Is that the business communication and coordination that you're paying them for through the contract? Why does the owner of the Bitter and Twisted Parlor on the hard corner of the nighttime saw cutting get zero notice, or the restaurant across the street? Why does the manager of the Palomar Hotel or the 200 apartments above it get 24-hour or no notice? Is that the business outreach that you expect for what you're paying for? The saw cutting, as Trent pointed out, was delayed after an uproar from stakeholders. And then we were told that it would happen over about a month starting next week. When some of these businesses, the ones that found out about the saw cutting, complained that it was too much, we were met with deaf ears by Kiewit. After such an uproar from business members, the Downtown Phoenix Incorporated and Marcus Coleman from the City of Phoenix arranged a meeting last Monday with Kiewit for stakeholders to air their concerns and hopefully find some resolution. That meeting further confused us on the schedule, offered no apologies for short notice initially, but more importantly, offered zero intention to rearrange the schedule hours of work with the stakeholders in any way. Much of the meeting was consumed by Kiewit not listening to the issues, but correcting stakeholders on their faulty memories and putting the blame back on the stakeholders. This is a cavalier attitude. I spoke of you once again. Is that the business outreach and coordination that you are paying for in this contract? The call ended with what I would call a threat. Kiewit manager said, if you work with us, we will work with you. Well, they're not working with us now. So the only way one can interpret that is to say, if you keep your mouth shut and absorb our damage to your businesses, we will consider working with you in the future. Others took it the same way. And again,
Mr. Schultz, I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but your time is up.
This is unacceptable. I'm asking the board to investigate this and change back to the practice you're paying for of them communicating and working with the affected businesses. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. And unfortunately, we can't comment on this based on it's on an agenda, but we'll definitely have a note in the previous meeting. We there was talk on this, and hopefully we can have more conversations with staff and Phoenix and other folks involved in this to see what can be done. So thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I will commit, I will follow up with both Mr. Colacott and Mr. Shields, and with you. I'll report back to you on that follow-up.
Perfect. Thank you. Second item, the consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action. Any of the committee members have any questions or comments on the consent agenda? We have 3 items. Our minutes are 2B, facilities maintenance contract change order, and our steel rail testing service contract. I'll take a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
So move, Mayor Hartke.
And
Mario from Phoenix, second.
perfect. Ask Pat a quick roll call vote since we're.
Mayor Hartke,
Yes.
Councilmember Heredia,
Yes.
Mr. Paniagua,
Yes.
Mr. Methvin.
Yes.
Motion passes, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 3, capital extension, amended locally preferred alternative and funding agreement. So call on Mr. Scott Smith to present this item.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I know we've been here a long time. This is a very, very exciting and simple ask. A couple weeks ago, the Phoenix City Council approved the locally preferred alternative for the CapEx project. This is being presented to you. Also, you are required to approve that. And also approved an agreement with the city of Phoenix for planning monies, $45.3 million, to begin the next stage of planning on this CapEx extension. So we strongly suggest you follow the lead of and the example of the city of Phoenix Council and approve this. Any questions?
Chair, I'd make a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, this is Mario. I would second gladly and just say that we're very excited about moving this forward today. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to take a roll vote?
Yeah, sorry, Pat.
Okay, that's okay. Mayor Hartke,
Yes.
Councilmember Heredia,
Yes.
Mr. Paniagua,
Yes.
and Mr. Methvin.
Yes.
Motion passes, Chair.
Perfect. Well, this is a great project. I was on mute, sorry. Great project for definitely Phoenix, but the region. So congrats. Next item. Item number 4, we're almost done. Report on current events and future agenda items. Anyone have anything?
Mr. Chair, this is Mario.
Go ahead, Mario.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just one comment on the last item that kind of relates to future items is we'd like to request that the outreach plan be presented on the capital extension project. We just want to have that presented to the board. Future agenda meeting with the outreach plan is going to be. And then the only other thing I was going to mention is just to tie back to the speaker comments that we had just a moment ago to what Councilwoman Pastor mentioned early on, just that any communication on that be reported back to the board as well. Just trying to tie her comments to the comments that were made here about the downtown stakeholders.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
And our next meeting Thursday, January 20th, 11:15. So this concludes our agenda. And no other questions, meeting is adjourned. So thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank you.
great holidays, Thanksgiving.
Thank you.